Hello lovely folk, here is another Wild Spirit revamp, which may be a little bit unwieldy because there's lots of pieces of paper to move around here, but as you can see it will be of the Wild Spirit O'Glovies pickup. Can you see this? The Magician card from the Wild Spirit deck, Cunning Man, Magical Spirit. That is the actual card. Let's have a look at it down here, it's probably a bit easier. That's what was actually published, and by the time it's so small that you can't even see his face properly because of all the borderings and so forth. And then I found my old folder from the very original ideas that I was doing, and I quite like to see this because it takes me right back to the 1990s when I was first kind of birthing these cards or bringing them into a concept, an idea, and this is how I was working with a very rudimentary computer, as I remember. I don't even think that I went onto what was the internet back in those days. I think it just had the ability to use very basic programs which created this rather nice thing which I couldn't do now. I don't know what program it was called, but it was very basic, and it came on a little disc, CD-ROM as it was, and I just added it to this, and this is how I was going to, well, this is how I did send this, not as it is now because it's got all bashed up and everything, but I did send this version to Llewellyn. This is what I thought it was going to look like, and he was the card that I chose for the representation of it. And as you can see, it was going to be called Divination Cards, Bringing the Magic Back to Life with a Tarot of Nature. It's all very long-winded. I didn't really know what I was doing back in the day, but it is what it is, and it has its own charm. So this is how it started off. So we'll just move this out of the way and look at his variations. Right, now so this one here, this is this is how it ended up borders and borders, you see, because this was actually my idea. This is how I presented it to them initially. I think I sent them about 6 cards, or maybe 10, I don't know, between 5 and 10 cards anyway, and they were all kind of designed like this. And as you can see, it's bore the stains of time as it has been transported around many moves. So this was what I envisaged it looking like. I did not have much of a clue about how people would not want so much bordering. I did a lot of research. I can remember doing sort of months and months of research on tarot presentation, but I still didn't get it right. I didn't understand that there weren't places you could go to on the internet. I don't even think I had an internet, to be honest. I don't think I had a connection. I just think I had the ability to do things with this very basic kind of art program, although everything you can see from this original is hand drawn in the old style with the black rotoring pen in the graphic way, and the colour kind of filled in afterwards. So I really liked, when I came to think about the revamp of this, I thought, how am I going to do this? Because I really like the way he's doing that leaping trance dance thing around the fire, but I don't think that his physical self would not probably have been able to contort in quite that way. So if I'm going to replicate him, he's going to have to keep the same wonky legs. And they're not too bad. I just know that if he probably tried to do that, it'd be very uncomfortable for him, especially in those pants that he's wearing. Anyway, so that was the original that got sent as my idea. It's got a little apple in the corner. I can't tell you why I chose that as his symbol, but there you go. He was number 1. And I chose the name Cunning Man because a cunning man in British folk tradition was the sort of the opposite of high magic. Sort of, he was the folk magic. He was the person doing the charms and the incantations in the wood kind of man, as opposed to a high wizard So I chose that because also I thought it was just a lovely title. I'm not sure how many other countries that would translate into, or what other people in other countries made of it, because of course predominantly this was published in America. So I don't know what people made of Cunning Man, whether people have that cunning tradition in other countries. It was certainly a thing here anyway. So he progressed into phase two rather, of trying to make him look. Now I think this is the one that made it onto the card rather than that one, which is still very, very graphic and it's not very highly coloured. It's more reliant on the lines and the detailing, of which there is quite a lot. That little fella there, I could tell you something about him. Maybe I will, maybe I won't, but he was very important to me at the time, and I incorporated him in to the design. This little chap here on the left. But yes, that version was rather sparsely coloured, so I did another version, which is the one that made it onto the card, because you can see here that is the same. Well, you can if I actually put them together, which is pretty tricky. Well, I just hold that up there a minute, so you can see this and this. So that's the one that they got to work from. By this point, he'd become much more densely coloured, and a lot of the lines had been... There's lots of dot shading still, but the lines are, well, less than this version. So it had kind of gone to an intermediary stage. And then I tried to move it on closer to how I was working now. Not quite sure what era I did this in, but this was after the deck had been published, and this was kind of my initial revamp of it probably, but I'm still using exactly the same design and exactly the same dot shading format. So it has moved on somewhat. It's more subtle and soft in its colouring, I think, and there's less dotting, but it's still not quite where it goes to. So that's, if I hold this up here, hopefully you can see, that's its kind of progression from where it started off. You think it was published in 2001, 2002, I'm not sure, 2001, I'm sure it was. No, I'm saying I'm sure it was, then I said I'm not sure, so I don't know. It was about then. It seems like yesterday, and yet it seems like a complete lifetime away at the same time. So early 2000s this was published, and that's the version that came out. So yes, and as we know, it did not stay in print very long. I can't say why. Perhaps it was just not, as usual with my work, it didn't quite capture the mood of the time, or because it had all this bordering around it, and even if you cut off the edge border, you'd still have an inner border. So I don't know, maybe some people could give me some feedback on why they thought that did not sell very well. And I ended up with the big stack of remaindered decks, which I ended up giving so many of them away, and now they're worth so much money and I've got virtually none left. But I'm glad. I just hope the people I did give them to actually kept them, and that they've enjoyed them for all these years. But who knows? Anyway, so that's the art progression. Let's go on to the actual revamp. Before I do, I'm giving you a lovely view here of my knitted thing, my textural knitted thing that is always my backdrop, that I did because it conjures up kind of earthy, strange, licheny tones. Anyway, yes, I remembered while I was doing this that I had thought of this gentleman here while I was actually creating the Cunning Man, although I've been able to find these pictures today really easily on the internet, but back when I was creating the Cunning Man I had no reference point at all. I don't think I actually had internet that was functioning until well into the early 2000s, after this deck had been published. So I was relying on stacks of books and things, so this would not have been something I had access to. So in my memory from a child I remembered Catweasel, and Catweasel didn't so much stick in my mind because of the storyline, but more because I just loved the idea that somebody could be called Catweasel and that he looked like that. And he'd kind of embedded himself into my very childish, mystical psyche of being interested in strange and wonderful things. And I didn't actually remember the story at all until I've just looked it up. So this was a TV programme. I don't know whether it was ever shown in any other country. I don't know how long after the early 1970s it was shown. I think it was probably in black and white in the 1960s. I'm not sure entirely. It says here that it's the year 1969 in the story. So I'm just going to skim through this, otherwise it's just giving you too much information and you can look him up for yourself. Anyway, so the premise of the story Catweasel was that an 11th century bumbling wizard named Catweasel was pursued by soldiers through a wood, carrying only his magic charm and his toad familiar. He says a spell as he jumps into a pond, and when he comes out he thinks he's made the wood and the soldiers disappear, but in fact he has jumped 900 years into the future. No wonder he looks like that, eh? And he arrives on a farm in rural England in the year 1969. So then it tells you about who he meets, and he has this toad called Touchwood, and he uses his magic amulet to hypnotise people into forgetting that they saw him, which is that would have really captured my imagination. I mean, even as a really tiny child, I think that must have embedded itself somewhere. So the second series was in 1970, so I think this was probably when I was very, very young. You know, I did actually sort of reveal that I was 3 in 1969, so I was very young when this was happening, and it would have all been in black and white, probably, unless it was reshown later on. Anyway, what I really loved about this kind of Wikipedia little thing about him was that Catweasel mistakes all modern technology for powerful magic, an example of Arthur C. Clarke's third law that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I did not read that very well, so I hope you can read it on the screen. So he thought that electricity was electricery, which is just perfect for the Cunning man type ethos, I think, and that the telling bone was the telephone. And when you look at a picture of the old telephone handset, it does look like a bone. And I can remember my dad then calling the phone the telling bone, which I didn't realise until just now, looking at this, that that's where he got it from. Which I just think is amazing how it all kind of sinks deep into you, but you don't remember it until something like the magic of the internet brings it back to you. And feeling flushed with success, in the final episode, his last words were, "Everything works, touch wood, everything works." There you go. Anyway, so he, although I had seen no photographs or pictures of him or any image of him since I was a very small child, he'd embedded himself firmly into my psyche, so that when I came to do the Cunning Man, I do know that he was kind of in there as an inspiration. So here we go with, I'm going to have to hold the camera right up and hope that we get these in. Right, it means me standing on my toes as best I can. It's not easy. Hoping you get those in. Knowing that this camera chops things off, knowing I can't see what I'm filming, and knowing that you're going to see it all faded. This one has been particularly disappointing because this central one without the lettering on it is the actual piece. So if I just come back up and you can see the two on the outer edges. Oh, that I could see this was actually showing you everything. The two on the outer edges there are the printed ones, and they are so disappointing because this one is very verdant and green in its the base colours are green, as they should be for him being out in the woodland. But yes, I'm afraid. Let's have a look at him in close quarters and see what I've changed. Okay, so we're looking at him, obviously, right, so there's him as was, there's him as is. obviously he's become much more realistic. There are no dots, there are no lines, everything is coloured in my new style. He actually retains his feathery hat, but just a more realistic one, and his hair and his look of blissed out trance, and his amulet, which on this one you can't really see because it's so small. This one he now has a wild spirit amulet. If you don't know what a wild spirit sign is, then I will I don't know really, I will refer you to something about that. I must have made a video about the wild spirit sign, my wild spirit sign, what it means. Maybe I'll have to do one. I'm not going to talk about it too much now. Anyway, he's wearing that. He still has his magical wand with the bells and the ribbons attached to it, so we've kept that. It is topped with a crystal. On this one you can't really tell because it's just very small. It's topped with a quartz crystal wrapped around with wire and twine and all sorts of crafty woodlandy things. He has bone toggles on his furry jacket. Now this furry jacket, which he wears in the original, I didn't really want to do a furry jacket for obvious reasons, because I don't like the idea of anybody wearing a furry anything at all, but I have to think that he's a woodland man and he obviously finds the pelts of creatures who have passed away and then uses those and doesn't go and kill them. Or maybe he does because he has to eat, I don't know. But that's what he's wearing anyway. It doesn't sit particularly well with me, but there you go. I can't sort of bring my ethos into every single thing. I have to just assume that he would have done that in an ethical way because he is a good man and not a cruel man, and works with nature and is part of nature and so forth and so on. Anyway, I'm focusing on his crotch rather here, aren't I? That was not intentional. He wore a sort of laced up pair of stripy crazy trousers, and I thought, well, they have to have a proper lace at least to show that they are laced up and not just kind of this you can see it better on this one actually. You know, he had just like this tied thing there. He retains his knife, what's that called? Sheath? Scabbard? Knife case? Yes, he has that, and he has his little charm bag as well in the new Revamp version. I've just noticed I've nearly talked all this time. This is going to be a two-parter, I'm afraid. I don't know how I managed to do it because I feel like I'm not really saying anything of any particular relevance, but there you go. I like to do in-depth things, I'm sure you've gathered by now. So yes, he retains those. What else does he retain from, let's look at the very original version. The background was too messy for my liking. There are two spirits in the background which are all very well and nicely done, but I could not really, it was going to be just too busy in the background, so I thought I would bring things more into the foreground where there wasn't much going on. And I will tell you a little bit about this. I'm not going to give you his name because I was working with this fellow here at the time. He was an unseen companion of mine in my travels in my inner journeys in the other worlds. He was my companion for quite a while, and he was a bark man who blended into bark, obviously, and was a wonderful, witty little marvellous fellow. Probably entirely my fault that we kind of lost touch, and I'm sure he's still out there somewhere doing his brilliant thing in another realm, but I have not seen him for a long time, and maybe he was just with me for that period, I don't know. It was unusual of me to incorporate him into this because that would be a very private thing, a very private world, so I presume he gave me permission to do so because I would not have used his image so closely if he hadn't given me permission. So I think he probably did, and probably enjoyed it actually, because he was a very amenable, cheeky, whimsical chap, and yes, so that was him. But I did not want to put him in the new version, so I had to find other woodland beings to put in. Now back forth, you will notice that in this version he is holding an apple, so my new version is also holding an apple. The apple of wisdom, the apple of knowledge, That's why the apple was in the corner, I presume. Yes. Also, it's just a symbol of nature, isn't it? Of seeds growing into apples, which is kind of magic of itself. So we have these two different new little woodland sprites, beings, companions to the cunning man. This one is tiny, tiny wee, has kind of apple pip eyes and is very small, and the other one is blending into everything, really, which is how I tend to do things. All of my wild companions in my artwork just blend into everything. They kind of, their energy shoots out because they're not literally tied to a physical form, so they're kind of betwixt and between, and they're just showing themselves to us partially, but they're not really that. They can morph, they can shift, but that's how they're showing themselves just now. So that's them there. And I also have this, because of the leaping, here we go again, because of the sort of leaping vague spirits we had in the background of the original. You can see that one there. It's two of them, one on the left, one on the right. I thought I would have another leaping green spirit here. Let's have a look at their face. Faces are very important to me. First thing I do always is a face, the key face of an image, always. The eyes and then the rest of the face, because if I haven't got that right, the rest of it isn't going to work. So faces are very, very important, even if they're really small, and that's going to translate. Obviously this is an A4, so if it was printed it'd be very, very small. I think I'm going to have to stop there and do part 2, because if I don't, I'm going to get cut off and it's going to be silly. So I will stop there and come back for part 2. I hope you will feel interested enough to join me for it. Thank you. Bye bye for now.